All right. It is showtime with zero warning whatsoever. No intro song here. Eat it, StreamYards. I'm not paying a dime. You and your crappy audio, screwing up all the different live streams that I love so much. Who wants to pay for that? It's like paying for a car that you see someone else driving and their wheel falls off. Oh, tingly, tingly. Here's my jingly. It is it's a gin and tonic, but this gin is actually made recipe from the Gin Club of England, by macerating, different berries like your, what do they call it? Shoot, juniper berries. Of course, that's the main ingredient, right? I put a little bit of cucumber in there, which I get from the Stillet channel. It's fantastic stuff. Fantastic stuff. The brown color is actually not from the gin, so I distill my gin down after I've macerated it to clear it up, which makes it look good. It also makes the flavor a little bit less cinnamony because there's a lot of cinnamon in gin. The brown actually comes from the quinoa bark. Now, quinoa bark has quinine. Quinine is the active ingredient in tonic. This is a gin and tonic, a big, fat, bubbly one, so I can get through the stream. It definitely tastes like it was invented by the English. This is the reason why they put gin with it. Quinine was a medication for malaria. And it definitely tastes like a medication for malaria. It's tree bark. If you made tea with tree bark, that's what quinine is. Okay? Now, the people who make tonic commercially are going to clean it up. You add a bunch of stuff to it. There's a lot of citrus in this. It's essentially what a soda is. Like the early soda pops, it would be a couple of active ingredient essential oils or something like that. And then they would have to add tons of sugar and tons of citrus and food coloring so it doesn't just taste like ass. Because it turns out that tea made from tree bark tastes just like ass. If you ever want to know what that tastes like, that's what it tastes like. But, damn, it doesn't make a good drink. It kind of has a distinct flavor. It's like the bitters you'd add to a beer, like hops. Alex Kosma is running late. You never know. He told me that his cat was in surgery. I hope that's not like sensitive personal information, Alex, but there it is. And I wouldn't blame him if he didn't make it at all, to be honest, because if my cat was in surgery, I'd be holding his little paw and just praying. But he's had the consideration to try and come here. He's going to be about 15 to 30 minutes late. It's all good. It's all good. Today, I want to talk about a little bit of an extension on the video I made before. The video I made before was let's see if I can pull it up, right? Go to YouTube. And I go to What is America Part 1. I wonder if it'll even pop up. Gotta scroll down. I'm not loved by the algorithm yet. I'm not consistent enough. I'm not consistent enough. Someday, I will actually show up on this algorithm. That's too funny. I've been wanting to change. Oh yeah, it's me. It's live right now. I've been wanting to change the name of the channel because I think the SEO is kind of garbage. That's just the way. That's just a fact. Like, Men Are Speaking is not a great distinct name. Or it's not great branding. What thing would I change it to? I don't know. Malacca Johns. My family has gained prominence in the Strait of Malacca. We were the colonial liaisons, the capitans, governors, and administrators for the Dutch East India Trading Company. By the way, if you want a terrifying view of how the world works, go to a former colony of the Dutch East India Trading Company, because their entire model of how a civilization should be, right? Like the Europeans were like aliens showing up in these massive ships, these giant floating houses, bigger than a house, right? And they showed up with all this advanced technology, and they were like, "Give us your nutmeg." I was like, "Okay, that's fair enough. Please don't shoot us." And it was just nutmeg quotas of some sort or another for a long time. And that was all we know about this alien civilization. And that kind of internalized into us, right? I mean, obviously we converted to Christianity, learned to read, write, learn how to do math, learn how to succeed, learn how to do a lot of things. But there's one thing that must be always upheld, is the quota. You're a former colonial subject. The great and holy quota is what meant the difference between life and death for these alien invaders, or that you have. And now the West is very much surprised when you have this class of former imperial administrators who hold the quota to be holy, who will push their children ultra hard to become engineers, scientists, doctors, lawyers, like from the age of 8, right? And to the point where the parents don't even always have to push it. Like for me, I was a self-starter. I would just go to the library, right? Because the paring down, right? Dog breeding, the dog breeding that goes into uplifting a people, the dog breeding had selected for people to just go to the library and study on their own without any prompting whatsoever. That's what my family was. So, yes, what is America Part 1? This is a good video because it actually preempts the whole Vivek Ramaswamy gate, right? It preempts the whole immigration debate. It's going to preempt this entire administration, okay? It's going to preempt everything, every bit of confusion that people have about what is this administration doing from the right? From the conservative. The conservatives are going to freak out because we didn't actually elect conservatives. Let's see if the audio of this is working, right?
Mostly lost the 2024 election.
There we go.
The Conservatives mostly lost the 2024 election.
Yes. Hakuna Matata here on the screen is correct. The Conservatives mostly lost the 2024 election. And I would actually change that from mostly to completely. Because I thought J.D. Vance might be like a conservative, but he's probably not actually. He's kind of pro-immigration. They all are, right? It's just because which conservative? That's the question. That's the question we're here to ask ourselves today. We have the meme of let me see if I can find the meme. I'm just going to put it on the screen. What kind of American? I want that memes. Give me the memes. Put them in my veins. Let's go. There we go. So terrible. If you want video, if you want pictures to be artifacted and de-resed to hell, just make it a meme and let it get passed around for a little bit. What kind of nerd are you? That's great. There we go. What kind of conservative are you? Right? Because there's more than one type. Now, when we say conservatives, what do we mean by that? And where I draw the distinction, actually, is the American-style conservatives versus the European-style conservatives. Alex will jump on this. I'm going to probably backtrack with him a little bit, and he can add his bit. So I'm using some of my mental energy to logging what I'm saying so that I can bring it back up when he gets here, because he's going to have a lot to say, I'm sure. American conservatism is very different from European conservatism. Let's start from the beginning of America. The first settlers to come here, not explorers, the first settlers, because the explorers were fully bought into the old world. They were just doing the old world's bidding to explore, to go find colonies, resources, that sort of thing. The New Worlders, those settlers, left Europe for a reason. They left Europe, and they went on the most risky journey. You're talking about, these are like the first colonists. Imagine if there were people on Earth that put together money so they could build a spaceship and go to Mars. What would motivate people to go that far? Like this imagine if some cult went to Elon Musk, some religious cult, and said, take us to Mars, baby, we're all in on Mars. And Elon's like, all right, sure, I'll charter you on the ship, because that's what the ships kind of were. A little bit of chartering, but they'd raise the money themselves, because I don't think the ship went back to England. I think it stayed there. I don't know. It's a good question. Did the Mayflower stay in the colonies? It's a good question, also an irrelevant question. The point is, these people had a tremendous amount of pressure to leave Europe. So already, from the very beginning, these people aren't exactly getting along with the order in Europe. They are so deviant from that current society that they want to get on a boat and travel for, let's ask Grok, how long? Sorry about that. This gin and tonic, this absolutely homemade gin and tonic. The only thing I didn't make was the moonshine. I bought that. Shout out to Fuse Vodka. It is by far the cheapest spirit that is also the most clear vodka I've had. It's in a plastic bottle, which violates one of my rules of alcohols. But it doesn't impart tastes. Unlike Pickers vodka, which tastes like I'm sucking on a corn husk. All right, how long was the Mayflower voyage. So September to November, so 2 months. Is that all you have to say? Oh, okay. 66 days, 2 months. 2 months at sea. These people are not sailors. They're settlers. They're getting onto a ship. Oh, Alex is here. What's up, Alex? You have no warning. I just threw you on here. How's it going, man?
Excellent. Yeah, is the audio coming through okay?
Audio sounds great, man. Thank you for getting set up well.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent. Yeah, I was just talking about, you got here at the beginning, right? So in the beginning, some people were so deviant and intolerant of the way things were in Europe that they got on a boat for 66 days and went to a completely strange and unsettled land. These people were neither sailors, nor were they... Really, I don't know if the people... I'd have to go through the manifest on the Mayflower to figure out who was on there, but it seemed to me they weren't going there because they were extremely competent at settling colonies. It seems like they just sort of got on a boat and went.
No, and a lot of the early American colonies were or North American colonies were initially attempting to settle the continent along the lines of like Spanish plans, but it turns out the geography and climate of North America is so wildly different that they essentially had to abandon that and reinvent their settlement pattern. Mayflower in particular, I forget what they called it. They had 2 tiers, like for that wave of settlers. They called them like the Saints and something else. So
Saints
it was
and Strangers, right?
Saints and the Strangers. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how long the ship stayed there. There is an interesting thing that the Massachusetts Bay Colony had a massive amount of remigration during the English Civil War because they were going home to fight in it.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So they're going back for a war, which, I mean, kind of tells you how cozy and quaint and happening the new colonies were. It's like, you know what? I might be able to get a stipend or some sort or some new shoes if I just get on this boat and go back where I came from and go fight in a war.
Well, I mean, for them, it was, I mean, that's always, anytime you see the Irish fighting in a war, that's the motivation. But, specifically for the
mercenaries.
For the New England Pilgrims, for them, it was a matter of intense religious importance and like
that's correct.
It's their obligation and duty.
Yeah, and what I was getting at before you got here. Oh, sorry, there's a private chat. Yeah, sorry about that. Oh, that's from G2G. What is G? Oh, good to go. All right.
Yeah, that was like right before I hopped, like
no
right
worries,
before
no
you pulled me in.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, G2G also means got to go sometimes. I was like confused for a second. So the point I was getting at was that the Americans from the very beginning were fairly deviant from mainstream Europe. And I think the Europeans take for granted that Americans, oh, you're our children, you're of us. It's like it's like the kid who left home, like joined the Marine Corps at 15, just completely uplifted their life, went to some strange far off land to go into trials unheard of, unknown.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you're still but you get a letter later saying like, hey, can you send us money? It's like that long lost child that is America is going to be fucking furious because there's probably still beef to be had if in this analogy of mine. But I think there's a lot of differences that we glaze over because America and Europe being friends is, I think, fairly recent. That's like World War I-ish. I think. I don't, and only half of Europe. I don't know. How long have we been friends for? Like, how long have we been actually getting along?
What's the last time we fought a war against one of them?
Spanish-American War, but that's Spain.
Yeah.
That's not really Central Europe. I mean, we kind of been doing our own thing. That's the thing of it. It's like we've had no interaction most of the time. I mean, other than taking in lots of immigrants, because we've had many immigrant waves over the years, like Irish, Italian, Polish, that sort of thing.
Right.
So
right. And those, it's an interesting history because you have like the War of 1812 because the U.S. and England did not get along for a really long time. You have the Spanish-American War. Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I guess the 20th century is mostly us getting dragged into their conflicts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Vietnam
and then
included.
Yeah, before that, like, you know, during even the American Civil War, most of Europe was like fairly ambivalent on us. Like, let's let them fight it out. We don't exactly have like, you know, there was an ambivalence toward the South and toward the North, but for the most part, European sentiment seemed to be like, we don't really have a vested interest in these guys.
Yeah, I mean, the Europeans were also talking with the South. Like, I don't think they
Mhm.
did any of them ever. It's usually that seems to be the money that
Mhm.
talks about who's legitimate in America. Like, we usually get loans. That's kind of our banker. It was kind of funny
Mhm.
because the people on Twitter who talk about or X now, who talk about tiny hat people, jumped onto me one day because I said something about bankers, and they thought I was talking about Jews. I was like, no, I was actually talking about the Dutch, just because of my background. But I was like, okay, it's like everybody is always forming banks and always screwing somebody over. Whoever's broke hates banks. Whoever's rich loves banks. That's just how it goes. Banks,
Murray
yeah.
Rothbard, I think it's Murray Rothbard has, what is the title? I think it's history of money and banking in the United States or something like that.
I'll have to check that out.
He duplicates a lot of the history in what has government done to our money, but he specifically has one fairly short book on the history of banking in the United States, and it's very much pre tiny hat banking. But
Yeah.
it's a wild story.
It's so funny because right now, I mean, I feel like it's an inorganic push. Like, there's a couple of like right now we're in the days of influencers, right? So if a couple of influencers have it in their craw, and someone made this observation that if you say tiny hat people bad on X, you just gain followers like crazy. It's pretty much just an influencer strategy.
Yeah, that's also the kind of thing that says to me like, that might be botted.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the CIA has probably done far more of all the things that are accused of those people. Like, oh yeah, they have blackmail material and they're constantly using money in warfare and buying off the media. It's like the CIA has the biggest media empire, probably. The USAID had the media empire. It's just whoever has the power is doing all the bullshit.
Right. Wait, and this is something I think we just talked about last week in DMs is the influence of America's, you know, foreign policy sphere.
Yeah.
So sort of that triune like State Department, Department of Defense, CIA with USAID, you know, in the middle. That and this is like it's not just the US doing this. I mean, Yuri Bezmenov talks about ideological subversion in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Like everybody who can do this kind of does do this.
Yeah.
But the USA has had a long time foreign policy of destabilize other countries.
Yes.
The reason for that is a people who are culturally cohesive and stable and you know together advocating for their national interests. It's very hard to get them to do something that you want, particularly like, you know, something like give the Pepsi Corporation, you know, a really good deal on manufacturing, or, you know, hey, sell all your oil to us, or
Absolutely.
X or Y.
Or yeah, I mean anything from banana plantations in South America. There's no business so trivial and small that we will not try and get our way on.
Right.
Yeah, the weird influence of these international entities, I think, are actually a great test of who people actually are, right? Because you could tell a lot about a person by what they fall for, because it tells you their hopes, it tells you their dreams, it tells you their values, it tells you what they think is important, right? Like take Weimar Germany, not to be guilty of Godwin's law. Take Weimar Germany. What did people hope for then? How did they get what tricked them? Right? How did people get tricked and for what? They wanted a heritage, a history. And I think Americans are very weird. And I don't think Europe really respects how on the moon Americans are in terms of attitude. I heard even small things like, oh, Americans, you should be so ashamed of Johnny Somali going and messing up stuff in Japan and Korea. I was like, I don't really feel any shame. I don't care. He's his own person. Why doesn't Japan do something? I don't know. I don't care. Yeah, this is one of our idiots. It's like, it's not even our, like, what is we don't have a first person plural in the way that Europe does.
Ooh, interesting. What do you mean by that? Say more about that.
When Americans say, like, you know, we went to the moon, I don't feel any sort of personal pride in going to the moon. I'm like, good for the people that went to the moon. It's just we is like a shorthand. But I feel like when people from the old world say that, like, well, we conquered this, it's like, I feel like there's a lot of personal pride in there, and it's almost like they really feel like they're a part of that. Because I don't really get that much pride from going to the moon. I think it's a great achievement. Good for them. Good for the people that did it. And it makes me feel like, man, I should really step up my game. You know, whereas when other countries, when they say like, oh, we conquered this and we conquered, it's almost like my football team got your football team. It's a weird attitudinal difference that I think doesn't get talked about that much. Like, we don't have the weird game chants either. Like, we don't get that personal about stuff that isn't actually personal. I guess what I'm saying? Like, our first person plural isn't that strong. When Americans say we went to the moon, it's like, yeah, it's pretty good. Proud of that. It's nice. Good job they did. Whereas if I don't know, France went to the moon, they'd be like, oh, sacre bleu, we went to the moon. You're all buffoons. See how great France is, and we are so great. I was like, no. I was like, they feel a lot of personal pride, I guess, when in their group. Americans don't. Right. Yeah.
There's a sort of prestige that they get to participate in that's inherent in them by their nation.
Which I don't think Americans have that. I think we're like, Americans aren't proud of, like, Americans are proud of the veterans of Vietnam or something, like, or let's say Korea, a war that we arguably won. We feel proud of the veterans, but we're not like thinking Korea owes us jack squat. You know what I mean? Like, we're not Is there's this sort of lack of personal identification with the achievements of the past. And I was thinking about this myself, actually. And I was thinking, like, it feels like stolen valor to be taken like a child wearing his grandpa's war medals, bragging about how, oh yeah, we stuck it to the French. I was like, you weren't there. What are you talking about? And that's why Americans actually are kind of immune to the racial shame. Whereas Europe is super not immune to racial shame. I had a guy apologize to me for the Dutch occupation of Indonesia. I was like, I don't give a shit. My family's probably helping you. Honestly, in fact, I probably owe you money. Anyways,
right. But that's something interesting, like particularly like apologizing for the colonization of whatever, or like, white progressives in America apologizing to blacks and doing the whole, like, chain march thing. It's like ridiculous.
Yes.
Like, do not get into the game of ancestral blood guilt. You will not like where this ends.
The problem is
it never ends anywhere good.
The problem is that the ancestral game of blood guilt is dyed into the ancestral game of blood pride.
Right.
You can't have one without it. Can you have one without? I don't think you can.
I don't think you can either. Wait, so,
And this is actually the kind of central. This is a central issue.
I'll take that back. Actually, I think they are separable.
Oh, are they? Okay, yeah. I would love to hear it.
So what you said about we landed in the moon, like, okay, great. I don't necessarily have a personal connection to those moon people, so good for them, but it is, I need to step up my game.
Okay, yeah.
It's
like a lesson, not a identification. Maybe.
Right. It's like there's a recognition of, like, people are in the past and we're not those people, but they essentially gave us the world that we have now. We're not guilty of their sins, nor do we necessarily deserve their virtues, but they've passed us down something to, something that's pretty miraculous. And the sign that you have a vibrant, thriving culture is that people take it upon themselves to be worthy of that. To take what they were given and create something greater, or to belong to the tradition of people who leave something, who leave behind a magnificent patrimony for their children.
And I don't know where that exactly comes from the United States, but I do have a speculation while you're speaking about that, is that I think that people, as Mark Twain said, families are always rising and falling in America. Like, you do not feel safe in America. Like, that's your grandpa's house, but, you take a mortgage on it and you put on the stock market. Well, Freddie Mac might be here in 30 years and all of your ancestral holdings are gone. That's how it goes. America has had actually so much instability that we feel a lot of fire under our ass, I think, to maintain it. Now, I'd love to hear a European counter that, because probably maybe they felt the same level of instability. Like, why do I would feel ashamed going into Canterbury Cathedral if I didn't think that my people could build it again if we needed to at a day's notice, right? Things that can be destroyed are things that and that can't be replaced are things that I feel like are my fault, like the perpetuity. Whereas I feel like there's a lot of braggadocio about the history of Europe. I hear a lot about Englanders. Like, of course, we pay attention to the English the most. Talking about how great the Victorian period was, and I was like, "Hey, that's great. The Victorian period is great. Why don't you resemble any of that?" Because those people would probably have a lot to say about your current English society. It'd probably give you a dressing down that you might not want to hear. I'd feel ashamed if my grandpa was a war hero. I'd be like, "Yeah, I need to step it up." And I'm going to add a little bit to what you said though about the feeling like you got to step it up. Is that let's take Germany for example, right? Germany, I think, is actually one of the most American parallel states to Europe that we are. I feel like the French. I feel like I don't really have a great handle on the French. The Germans, I do feel like there's a bit of handle on because Americans are also trying to architect their future. They always have a vision of what they want to do, and they will go 110% in that direction, whether they like it to or not, whether it's a good idea or not. We will go. We will build 1 million hamburger joints until someone finally tells us to stop. Like until finally the market crashes out. We will take stuff to its logical conclusion.
America also kind of has a spiritual kinship because large regions of the United States, particularly in the westward expansion, were principally occupied and settled by Germans cosplaying as English.
Was that the Amish were? Is that? Yeah.
Yeah. There's just particularly in the Jiminy Christmas.
Oh, sorry. Your video will catch up. It's all good.
Yeah, particularly in like the Pennsylvania kind of area. And that sort of mid-Atlantic area, there was massive waves of German settlement and German-descended peoples moving into the Midwest.
Well, that's the Pennsylvania Dutch, which is actually supposed to be Deutsch, I think, but Americans don't. They just heard it and they're like, "You're Dutch. They're Dutch, right?" It's like we don't.
There's I've had multiple people tell me about this, like living in sort of the backwoods regions of Pennsylvania, that there are entire cemeteries going all the way back to the Revolutionary War period where every headstone is in German.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it is,
it's interesting that like you have the Dutch and the Germans, and they come here and they settle here, but there's actually pretty quickly a distinct ethnogenesis to the point where most people are even unaware of these groups being different and like not necessarily constitutive of America. Can you hold on 1 second? I got the vet calling me.
Oh yeah, sure. No worries. Take the vet. I already explained your situation. Hope you don't mind. I'll give you some of your personal information now. Is that he's got a cat that's sick. And I'm so sorry for the sick cat. Shout out to everybody in the sick cats. I was telling everybody that if I had a sick cat, I would have dropped everything. But sometimes you have to just let the cat be sick. Let it do its thing. Let the doctors, the vets, whoever it is, do their job, and life goes on, right? Anyways, yeah. The funny thing about the Germans, right, is that they feel a tremendous amount of blood guilt for World War II, right? And people would say, well, obviously you should feel guilt. I think if America did the exact same horrific stuff, we'd probably just brush it off after a generation or two. Like there is something weird about America where we just like, hey, that wasn't me. I wasn't there. Screw it. I don't care. And someone pointed out in a Rammstein music video, they were showing Native Americans being attacked by Americans. I think it was like the Rammstein video for America. And one of my friends said, "Hey, why don't you put some Jews on there and make one for the Germans?" And I was thinking to myself, Americans don't actually care. Now, it's important to quantify what caring means. So, caring is an emotion, and emotions do have power. They have magnitude, right? It's not just the direction of the caring; it's how much do you care, and how do you quantify how much you care? Well, you can quantify it by a couple things: how much you change your lifestyle, how much money you're willing to part with. Material wealth, and how much you're willing to reduce your social sphere. And I think the revealed preference of Americans is that we are not willing to really put any time into fixing what we did to the Native Americans, really. Nor are we really willing to part with any substantial amount of wealth. And that wealth has to be abstracted through the state, right? Nobody's writing a personal check. It has to be abstracted through the state, where it's just this big ball, this cloud of nebulous money being thrown around. And we certainly don't reduce our social sphere, right? It's not like we're going to go and make social pariahs of people that are, call Indians Injuns or anything like that. We just say, oh, Howard, stop. And the Thanksgiving feast goes on, ironically enough. Americans have this weird resilience, resistance, immunity to ancestral shame that definitely other nations have. I think the sort of nebulous ethnic background actually gifts America the ability to just wash away all of those issues, and until the issues actually just become personal issues, right? So if you're a physician in Alabama whose direct ancestor was a slaveholder, I don't even think those people really feel that bad about it, and nor does anyone compel them to feel bad about it. They're like, that was your grandfather, that was your great grandfather. Things change. It is what it is, right? This may be also speaking to how scattershot we are with historical accountability in America, because Americans, not only do we not feel a tremendous amount of guilt over our ancestral deeds, possibly due to us being sort of ethnically nebulous, we also commodify shame and commodify ancestral shame in politics, right? So instead of just making the slaveholders feel bad, we decided to make every white person in America feel bad. And that level of dilution and amorphous, scattershot, but politically optimized shame, first off, it lets everyone who actually did have something to do with it sort of walk away and not worry, like the entire Democratic Party. It's actually a good example of that. They just walk, hey, we switched. That's actually not a bad example of it. Just literally, you could just like turn around and say, like, yeah, hey, that was Friday and today's Monday. What are you gonna do, right? That's super funny. I think that's terrifying, actually, in a lot of ways. Now, that's within those people's lifetimes, right? So that's less excusable. But the people who actually are the descendants of slaveholders are not held to any higher account than just any old average white guy, which dilutes the power of it. It dilutes the accountability, and it completely abstracts the blame that would go into it. So it has no power eventually. So interestingly enough, because of the political value extraction of that shame, they basically petered themselves out. And apparently the half-life of that kind of political shame is about 60 years, because that was about when the civil rights era began from now. And I think the civil rights era has completely lost cachet. Now that's given some accelerated extraction in the last 5 years. Yeah. Things accelerated a little bit, which accelerated the death of this political movement, this political shame extraction. Yeah, America's a weird place, because not only are our ethnic groups nebulous, like everyone's kind of a half of a thing. There are very few people here who are pure German. So what American would ever feel bad about World War II, right? Well, they don't ethnically feel bad, because we also have this other abstraction that allows us to sort of hide from all that, and that is the abstraction of being an American. It's like, okay, well, let's say I'm ancestrally French, right? and let's say I'm an American who happens to be fully French. And not only that, I can trace my lineage to generals who worked under Napoleon Bonaparte. I don't feel any animosity, though, towards Englishmen, because I'm an American. I got this great umbrella that allows me to just chameleon, like Homer Simpson walking back into the hedges, and just walk away from my ethnicity. I think giving people the ability to wear a mask or wear a different hat or wear a different identity, they will pretty much wear it whenever it's convenient, unconsciously. So there's a couple of different forces. Hey, Alex, how's things going? You're on.
Good. He's out of surgery, nice and safe and sound.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
What? May I ask what happened?
He fucked up one of his paws, presumably falling from something and like getting hooked in. So one of his claws, instead of like being out like this and retracting, is just like,
oh, he fully bent back that's be some delamination then of like the whatever holds the claw. Oh,
he's probably getting partially declawed.
Oh, well, it sounds like he already has been in a bit of a way. Yeah. That's awful.
Well, he's polydactyl, so he has spares.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, so I was just telling everybody that the couple of different things that keep Americans from feeling ancestral blood guilt. And you caught the last one, which is that we have the abstraction called being an American, where you can kind of just disappear into the crowd. You don't have to feel accountable for anything your ancestors did. The fact is that in politics in America, America is a massive value extraction. We're very good at value extraction. And what I mean by that is that the political value of ancestral shame, of such as slavery, was maximized. And to maximize it, they made the group that was guilty of the slavery as big as possible, preposterously large, the entire white race, which is 85% of the country, depending on which year you're looking at.
As opposed to between 1% and 2% of owners, and then perhaps, another like 5% maximum that were participatory in the system directly as laborers, overseers, etc.
Exactly, but those people only have so much wealth that you can extract from. But if we make all the white people feel bad, we can get donations from everybody on NPR.
Right.
So, but by doing so, you've completely diluted and opened the playing field so that the people who actually are involved in it can just wash their hands of it and just join the rest of everybody else. In other words, instead of that 5% owing 100% of the bill, it's now that 85% everybody in there has got like this tiny minuscule amount of the bill. So everyone carries a little bit of, yeah.
Also, the groups that are receptive of the payout has been expanded to Nigerians who
yes,
whose family presence here dates from the 20th century, and then how do you handle for instance heritage American blacks who are descended from both slave owners and slaves themselves?
Yes.
It gets really, really messy very, very quickly. This is also one of the reasons I'm like resentful, particularly of the race communists, like the critical race theory schools, and even just progressives for providing cover to this. Is like, again, there was a sense in the America that I was like growing up in that American blacks and whites were like on the road to not considering themselves like of separate ethnic groups, just as had happened with the English and the Germans. It's like, yeah, we went through a history. We are not those people anymore. We are the people that we are now, and what does being American mean now? And now we're here. Yeah. Now we're here with this dumb, ancestral blood guilt thing, and like. You are actively making the state of affairs between human beings worse.
By a lot,
you're making it worse for something that is not distinguishable or actionable meaningfully. And in fact, if you were to be expansive about, okay, let's talk about harms caused, let's be inclusive of all ancestors. This calculus may not even wind up in a way that you like. Like, correct. It is possible that American, like, if you construe it widely, like American blacks may actually owe American whites a fair amount. Like
the Scott Adams argument, and they're definitely in a better position. Like nobody wants to go back to Africa. Almost nobody wants to go back to Africa. I wouldn't want to go to Africa. Yeah, and
also we now have the clear example of Liberia. Like it's just not a good idea.
Correct. And the funny thing is, you have the reaction to that, that is the white identitarians, and they kind of like want to hide inside of the winning party right now, the conservative. And I started this stream talking about which conservative are you, right? I pulled up the meme of what kind of American are you, all right? The guy with
my favorite one of those is what kind of conservative are you, Ashkenazi or Sephardic? After all the doxings, how many of those guys turned out to be Jewish?
That is so funny. It'd be kind of funny if I just started pretending to be Jewish. I've only pretended to be Jewish once, and it was not my fault. It was not my fault. It was my dental assistant. He saw my last name, which is Manasseh, and he thought I was Jewish. Manasseh is a tribe of Israel. It's not and he was like, "Hey, it's great. We should come back to the motherland sometime. See, like you can go there for free." And I was like, "I can go there for free." how far? Okay, right now this is a dental discount, which I think, by the way, spiritually is the most Jewish thing I could possibly do. So I feel like I'm already spiritually there. If I just pretended to be Jewish and just make a big fuss of it, and that's just my work. Like that's just I'm just like a Ben Shapiro, and then eventually I just reveal like, no, I'm not. I feel like you have to be a bad behaving person on the internet to get attention. It'd be like really funny to just go through my Jewish. Isn't Milo Yiannopoulos pretend to be Jewish? Is he Jewish? Is he pretend to be Jewish?
I have no idea.
I don't know if he's pretending to be gay or Catholic or Jewish or what.
Yeah. Wait, it's the who was it that coined the term cluster B civilization? I mean, that's what we're in right now.
Oh yeah,
so,
man.
Social media just amplifies it. Like, here's the really wacky thing is, the expansive takeover of, things like race Marxists and stuff like that would not be possible prior to social media. Like, sure, they'd be in institutions, they'd be in colleges, but like, it would be maybe an elite belief, not necessarily something you'd get normies to go along with in widespread ways, especially because like the particular clusters of pathological behaviors that it appeals to and enables are also co-enabled by social media.
Oh yeah, social media is a narcissist. This is the greatest time to be a narcissist. Absolutely, like by all means. I could pretend to have cancer. I could pretend to have a kid who has cancer. I could pretend all kinds of things. I could probably deep fake myself in the Holy Mount of Israel that I'm getting attacked by. It doesn't matter because everyone's going to run with it, and there's going to be a GoFundMe for it in no time. And if I'm a woman, it's just even easier. Just like, especially if I'm an attractive woman, you can just pretend to get robbed at gunpoint, and people won't question it. I can just barely question it. I think people are coming out of that now because social media is an amazing thing.
Do you think it's because I think it's impossible. It's basically impossible to have a cohesive meta narrative or cultural identity, metaphysical like domain of belonging for a people in a society that is dominated by narcissists and pathological behavior. I mean, do you think we're coming out of it to the point where we can be reconstitutive of a sort of elective group identity like being American?
What I feel like America is a bit of a battleground at all times. Like this is actually where the world hashes out its problems. You know what I mean? This is where different schools of European philosophy will actually go and have their fight here most of the time, I think. Sometimes that used to stay contained to academia. And I think social media does indeed allow the reach to go massive, despite its lack of validity, right? So I'll take an example like the Black Hebrew Israelites are a really good example, right? By the way, those people are fascinating to me because they believe in some like. No offense to Mormons, I used to be a Mormon. I really like you guys. It is like Mormon level crazy fanfic on history. Beyond that, actually, because they play with the. I don't know if are you aware? Do you know about the Black Hebrew Israelites?
Vaguely. These are similar to but different from the Nation of Islam type stuff.
I think I'm getting the two confused, to be honest, but I'm not sure if the two are actually distinct anymore. But yes, so you get this preposterous belief system, which is amazing, and it actually only really thrives in the pockets before social media, right? And then you have social media, because social media is a great way to amplify lies. It's also a great way to have a public beating session, just a public flogging of those lies, right? It just takes time. It just takes someone making the right 3-hour lore deep dive video before people are like, they make the right video that then Penguin Z0 like reacts to, and everybody else reacts to, and Asmongold reacts to, because that's your normie channel, right? What we're having right now is almost like a Man of War jellyfish, where it's actually made up of multiple distinct biological entities that live in a colony together. So you actually have this normie funnel, right? It hasn't become one organism yet. It's a bunch of different organisms. They will actually oftentimes attack each other and sometimes disavow each other, but they still use each other. Like the ability to use the right's ability to use left-wing media against left-wing media has actually been pretty fascinating. especially recently, because all you have to do is put out preposterous things and have them react to it, or put out things that are totally normal and force them to overreact to normal stuff. Like Donald Trump's speech recently was actually just nothing but that. It was just normal stuff. We're happy about normal good things, and we have half the room hates it, and they just look like the Grinch. Anyways,
yeah, I mean, libs of TikTok launched an entire career of here are people in their own words sincerely saying things that they believe, presented with no commentary.
I don't think she's been doing that.
Watch how fucking nuts these guys. I mean,
it's funny.
She's kind of moved off of it, but it was incredibly revelatory.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing is there's a lot of revelation, there's a lot of lies, but I feel like the immune system is catching up. The truth immune system. So I'm actually quite optimistic about social media. I think it's actually been a force for extreme good, to the point where you have Bill Murray like questioning the Watergate, because he's, and everyone gets to see that of like a guy just on air just discredit Bob Woodward, who was supposed to be this big authority in journalistic integrity. Is like, yeah, he's a liar, and we get to see that. We get to see all the different sides of the story. Now, there is some compartmentalization, but I think one of the... All right, this is a grim thing. I'm going to be grim for a second. We're also in an age of great filters, because with great change comes great filters. All right? And the NGMI not going to make it, there's going to be a not going to make it's. And the not going to make it's are the ones who fall victim. Like they get their dopamine feedback loop inside of their echo chamber, because I've yet to see a single echo chamber really be vindicated forever. The Nick Fuentes guys are actually a good echo chamber, because they will stay in there and they're locked in. Just like Mac from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I've made up my mind. I'm dug in. And no matter how much evidence you give, I'm never going to budge. And these guys are ride or die. And they're definitely not going to ride. So we got a bit of a filtering thing, and I'm hoping that people just get away from politics if they can't mentally handle the amount of nuance.
Yeah, there's everybody holds, even the most like staunch like threat to our democracy people, and like people who idealize and fetishize democracy, have some deeply entrenched anti-democratic views. And I'm actually a collector of interesting anti-democratic opinions.
Oh, that's awesome.
But one of my favorites is the existence of a thrall class. These are people who are like legally adults, but not considered to be independent participants in the political system.
Oh, I see.
It's kind of like Norse like in Norse clan structures, like quasi slaves, but they're not necessarily conquered people. Heinlein actually sort of recaptured the idea in the difference between citizens and civilians. This is an anti-democratic idea that I believe is necessary to sustain democracy, just as much as deep state is actually implicit in democracy. Nowhere is it outlined, but if you are going to have a democratic system, you must have a deep state, which is anti-democratic. In order to have a democracy that is also going to sustain itself, you do need a distinction between citizens and civilians.
And the funny thing is the deep state actually has changed. Because now because the deep state is no longer the state. It's actually kind of terrifying and maybe liberating. It depends on your point of view. The deep state is now the set of the cabal of influencers. Like Elon Musk is questionably the head of the deep state. It's just that he's disinterested in political. He's probably on the spectrum. I don't want to be like the dude who's going on the meme of like Elon's autistic. He probably is. And my wife's autistic. I'm an engineer. I work with a lot of autistic people. The one thing autistic people hate is lies, because they can't mentally process lies. It's literally they're allergic to it. They'll start sweating. They'll get red. They'll get upset, and they'll just blurt it out to the CEO. The rocket's going to blow up. And then they're gonna say that. They can't exist without lies. So I kind of feel like they're biologically the best gatekeepers of the deep state, and they seem to be. There are, of course, like questions. I like to think of the Ian Miles Cheong question, because I've thought about that a lot. Ian Miles Cheong? He's the Malaysian fella. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, Ian Miles Cheong is this Malaysian fella. He kind of LARPs as a conservative to get views. Many such cases. You don't have to be Malaysian to do that, by the way. You can be fully American and do that too. And But he is a damn good, useful aggregator of stories. He steals a lot of them. He steals all of them for all I care. But aggregating itself has value. So he's tolerated by this Elon Musk deep state and retweeted once in a while because he's just so damn convenient. Because like I could follow 100 accounts or I could just follow Ian Miles Chong. And that's it. I don't follow Ian Miles Chong. I'd rather just follow the 100 accounts, but that's a personal decision. I have to acknowledge that not everyone's going to want to do that. Right? So
Did
he
you
has
ever
a
get much
utility.
into vintage clothing?
Oh, me?
He's a picker.
Was he-
These are the guys. These are guys who go around to, mass lots and what do you call it? Like estate sales, Goodwills, stuff like that, and search for all the good shit and buy it to be resold later at a high-end vintage
Yes.
place.
They are, yeah, he's the middleman minority of the internet information age. That is so funny. Which is in keeping because he's probably, I'm going to out myself. He's probably the same ethnic group as me. I'm half Northern English, half Hakka. Hakka own Malacca, which is just it's an alliteration, but it's a fun coincidence that the Hakka tribe of China.
Look into Dutch territory namings and positions.
Oh, really?
The bosses in the Dutch colonies are patroons, and the major ethnic group that composed the New York, like the New Amsterdam settlement, was Walloons.
Oh, that's the patroons. That's too funny.
It gets silly fast.
I'm gonna break really quick. Just a bio break real quick. Could you vamp
I'll
for
do
a
the
second?
same. Oh,
you do the same?
I guess I will not do the same.
Yeah, would you mind vamping for a second? No, I'll be a minute. All right, perfect.
Oh, yeah, it's particularly, I guess I'll take this for an aside talking about aggregation. It's interesting looking at content aggregators and knowing that the information ecosystem changes over time. Something like Libs of TikTok, Ian Miles Chong are very useful in aggregators right now where the main cost is discovery. I had a former life in video content, video streaming, particularly working with indie films. So, this was a bit of a challenge we faced. We're in an epoch right now where discovery is the principal cost. And then, the direction we're headed toward is disaggregation and curation toward narrowly tailored interests. So right now, the biggest costs are associated with finding something outside of your domain versus if you're tapped into your domain already, it's very easy to find originals. I think, this too is cyclical and technologically mediated. And I say, give it, God, how long ago was Fandor? Give it probably 8 or 9 years and we'll actually be back in a content ecosystem where disaggregation is the main cost. Sorry, I was just going about Ian Miles Chong and pickers versus versus sort of how that particular wheel turns in discovery cost.
So there's a great thing in physics that we learn about called waves. And a wave is just a phenomenon by which there's two different modes of energy storage and they just oscillate between the two of each other. So electromagnetic, there's the electrical field, there's the magnetic field. There are physical waves where it's like displacement versus potential energy sort of thing, or displacement versus velocity, right? The time of minimum displacement from the mean is the time of maximum velocity, right? So you're just changing energies. And I feel like the civilization and the information ecosphere changes its energy from scope to quality almost. I don't know. I'm just thinking about this just now, that you'll get this massive array of information that you've never had access to, but all of it's unvetted. And quickly, as it becomes popular, it becomes more corrupted, right? So then how do you take that popularity and then decorrupt it? It is actually disaggregation of it. I think that's the right word for it. You have a filter. You have someone who's a tastemaker. That's probably going to happen with film soon too. Like,
that was the world I was in, where principally working in the world of independent film streaming. Most of the people who are rights holders to independent films are aggregators because independent films don't hold much worth on their own. But you put them together into a portfolio and like, okay, there's some money to this. The problem is each one doesn't necessarily draw a ton of attention. So the information ecosystem we were operating in is, aggregation is cheap. The problem is curation and disaggregating,
Oh, that's true.
connecting people with the specific thing that they want.
Yeah.
But you mentioned filters, and I think there's a good tie back to, you said the not going to make it, and we are coming to another great filter.
Yeah, the not going to make it's are people that just cannot mentally deal with politics. Now, there's a bit of an oscillation here too. Is that there were a lot of not going to make it's on the leftist side because they were useful to be a clamoring mob. However, now the right is equipped with the correct rhetorical and even environmental weapons to attack that very low value argumentation. These people are now getting beaten the FO out, BTFO'd really bad. Because one of the tools, not all of the tools, but one of the tools is just simply, I just don't care, Margaret. Like, I really don't care. So you'll say, like, well, think about this, think about that. Like, we need to shut down the schools because if COVID happened again, America probably wouldn't give that much of a damn. And some people would stand on it as like a virtue signal, like, we really care about it. And the rest of America would be like, we're over it. We don't care. Let them, people are going to die. They're going to die. I don't know. People die every day. I don't know. Whereas the one who are virtue signaling will then further show the collapse of their society. And it's a self-correcting problem, right? Right now what you have is that you have the people who are not going to make it are no longer useful to the left. Like the people who don't have a lot of cognitive power. It used to be that you could just glue your hand to the road and get a news story. But now you just get made fun of online, right? The culture has shifted so that people need quality of argumentation. And even today, like when I say something very simple, like the AI versus art debate, AI versus artists, right? I'll say that we need to stop treating art like it's some sacred profession. That it is susceptible to market forces, and there's nothing that elevates it above anybody else's. To quote Langston Hughes, there's as much dignity in plowing a field as there is in writing a poem. And the artists, most people agreed with me, and the artist that popped on basically just said the exact argument that I said isn't true, which is like, no, it's sacred, and it's wonderful, and it's about passion. I'm like, that's great, but you can't force people to pay for it. So what are we going to do with this AI art thing, right? Because now it's posing a different question. It's posing, what is the monetary value of someone's work making art? And the market is horrifying because the market doesn't care about human dignity. And I simply just point that out. I for one would be happy to like house multiple artists on my land and like a little trailer park of like artists doing whatever they want to do, and sink myself 5 figures into that. But you can't expect normal people to do that, so they're just going to make AI thumbnails.
So there's it's interesting that the principal absorbing barrier. There's a lot of absorbing barriers, particularly with not going to make it leftists. But in the art domain, there's an interesting analogy to Cologne, Germany. So Cologne, post World War II, was very, very heavily bombed. I think the city was like 97% destroyed. It dodged being made the capital of West Germany in favor of Bonn, like half an hour south. And then it also dodged being made the regional capital to Dusseldorf about an hour north. So Cologne did not get massive rebuilding funds. And for a long time, despite being a cultural center of Germany, was kind of a low rent, not a ton going on town. And being very, very poor and rents being cheap, there was an art scene. Suddenly Cologne becomes, I think in the 70s, Cologne starts becoming a magnet for German TV, particularly reality TV and news. And other like sort of peripheral business that's associated with Bonn and Dusseldorf. And the cost of rents go up, and artist collectives become not incredibly viable. Particularly galleries was one of the big things. And there's this guy who's, I think he was a gallery manager and also an artist himself. And he's like, look, I see the great filter coming. And we're not all going to make it if we try and like everybody gets equal money, everybody gets equal attention. So what he would do is go around to the different galleries, and if he found one that had like truly discerning taste, great work, great residential artist, he would, you know, inconspicuously paint a banana outside. And there's a bunch of buildings that have these bananas on them. He was essentially like, you know, marking with like lamb's blood over the door.
Oh, that's
like,
too funny.
You know, let the curse pass over this one.
That's
and
great.
I forget the guy's name, but he's essentially credited with saving the Cologne art scene from the absorbing barrier by saying, you guys ain't going to make it.
Yeah, well, that's the aggregator plus filter, right? He's gathering that all up. He's creating one unified symbol that says this is. That's actually interesting because I was talking with my wife about this earlier today, and I noticed that none of these graphic artists have made a consortium that verifies or credentializes the quality, right? Like let's say you're an oil painter, fairly specialized, high barrier to entry, got it. However, fairly easy to fake if you're doing reproductions. Why wouldn't there be some sort of oil painters consortium or oil painters guild where they tell you, they send you a paper like describing what they want you to paint, which means that it's individual for you. So you can't just pull it off the internet or something like that. You have to actually paint it with physical oil paint and then send it in. And then they give you a badge saying yes. And they also give you a spot on their webpage saying like, yes, this man is a painter, a genuine painter. And you can look him up. He's a real painter. I haven't seen any sort of attempt at quality control. I don't know the difference between a Kazakhstani like rando on the internet and someone who's actually a legit graphics designer, except by doing tons of research into their work, which also can be fabricated and faked.
Right.
So it's like in other words, artists have taken so little, and I'm going to loop this back to liberals soon, the leftists soon. They have taken so little curation of their own profession to make it easy for me to buy genuine art before the new paradigm showed up. It's like not building the castle before the Mongols arrive, right? They had not built up this defense, and now I can't tell the difference between an average graphic artist and AI in terms of legitimacy, because there's been just so much BS in their field. When you're a stonemason, you create a stonemasons guild so that when someone hires a stonemason, they know they're getting quality, so that way they don't look down on the entire profession all at once. And I'm going to take artists and just replace that with leftist liberal, because they've just allowed any asshole to champion their political cause and say stuff that is crazy to the point where the one person they're trying to have save their movement is friggin' Hassan Piker, right, who is so easy to he's waiting. I was telling you before, that 3-hour YouTube video that just goes into the lore dump and completely discredits him is pending. Maybe it was the one by Ethan Ralph. Maybe that'll get more legs. But there's going to be more of those that go through and just pour through his footage and just pull up so much damning stuff that you can't stop
even
it.
EFAP has found like damning stuff on him just looking into the copyright violation. That's like, holy shit.
Yeah, him walking away from his computer. Yeah, he's going to be under so much attack and scrutiny. As soon as they have no champions. Sorry, just flash of lightning. I had a thought the other day that there is actually a really, as an East Asianer, I believe in balance. So I was thinking, what's the balance between in-group and out-group preference? There's a healthy balance. You shouldn't be fully accepting of your in-group, because then you're going to have extremely low quality of your in-group. Like however, if I have
if you're overly permissive with your in-group, you are incapable of cultivating virtue within them anymore, because you are incapable of holding them to account for vicious behavior.
On the corollary of that, if you are too restrictive of your out-group, I hold, but I do not am yet convinced of this, is that you will now hold out so much virtue and value that you will look backwards if they start to overtake you. So it's great to say like, England's the best, white man's burden, we're the conquered the world. But then as soon as someone starts to like do a little bit better than you, all of that falls apart, because you didn't let anybody else in. right? So the right has actually been really inclusive of leftists that have a good point and want to leave. That has actually been a massive strength. So anybody on the right who says, "Oh, we should be more like the left," is like, you're an idiot because you're not thinking of the secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and quintary like effects of that. And this 4D chess game that we're playing is like, okay, we're letting this person who has got some moral issues into our movement. We're letting them speak. Okay. Well, the thing is, they start to bring in other arguments that start assisting your group, but at least it also shows that your group is not that restrictive, which means that people don't feel so bad. If people just lit Dave Rubin on fire for being gay, that would have been a huge miscalculation, despite the fact that it's against some of the central tenets, like Christianity, of the right. It's like, so there's actually a certain amount of accepting that you need to have. This is actually one of the reasons why Christianity is so successful, by the way, as a religion historically. Especially Christianity thrives when it's being attacked. When it's under persecution, it does great. My ancestors know that very well because it forces you to have a really high standard for your in-group, so you look as good as possible, right? You have to let your light shine. You have to really walk the walk. You have to be the fruit upon the tree that vindicates the tree. In other words, your church looks only as good as you do. So when you go out there and act like a jerk, you make your church look bad. So we worked really hard to have high standards on our in-group, and then we accepted anybody into our group that was willing to just pass some basic trials, because our trials were also the same as the left to right. Is the left will set you on fire if you leave the left. Islam will set you on fire if you leave Islam. So there was already the barrier in there. We didn't have to impose anything extra. They're willing to risk it all. So what I'm saying is that, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to wrap this up. The social movement the leftists have set up is actually, looking back on it, so destined to fail because it maximizes its immediate power, but sacrifices everything that builds the pillars of strength that would keep it sustained. However, the right has been a very slow slog to power, but the pillars are there that provide strength. And this is, to close that up, this is no time to start destroying the pillars that got us here, such as being accepting. Right. Yeah.
Right. You have to remember where on the wheel of samsara you are. I think also your observation. So samsara, the cycle of reincarnation. I mean, it's weird to say, but so much of life and history is in fact cyclical. James Lindsay, as I think poorly as he puts this at times, is that a cyclical system is also not without trajectory or destination, and that it is going somewhere. Also worth noting, what you said about moving between stored energy states is also a great analogy for understanding this. Yes, you will move back and forth between stored energy states. It's another wonderful way of expressing the pendulum, but also contains some a nested, like, it's a better model because not all stored energy states operate exactly alike. I.e., moving between stored energy states, they do not behave symmetrically, whereas a pendulum does.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what gives your recurrent cycle trajectory. Where we are right now, and I think, both of us are old enough to have lived through this. People in their 70s are perhaps old enough to have lived through 2 or 3 cycles. Growing up in the 90s in America, you saw at the time, it was the moral majority Christian right that was in the position of having overplayed its hand, depleted its talent, and they were selecting for qualities other than virtue in their headline advocates. And you got people like Tipper Gore, she's definitely better than Hassan Piker, but definitely was also not a high caliber figure as a sort of leading light in this dying hegemony. And then the left takes over because they had time in the wilderness and cultivated strength, and then progressively undercut it. This is where the citizen civilian distinction becomes really important, actually, and part of why I think you need it to make a sustainable democracy. Is the not going to make it folks. if they are permitted to be participants in the political system for free, your
Yes.
political system will produce people who have other courses to success than virtue. And you will be trapped in this cycle. You do need to distinguish between people who affirmatively commit to a life of virtue and go to great pains to demonstrate it, having political voice, versus people who are unwilling to do that, having none.
Yeah, it actually kind of
having relatively constrained participatory rights in a democratic system. You know, things like civil rights, natural rights, however you want to characterize it. You know, they're a person, they're allowed to go unmolested, carry out their business, etc. But they shouldn't be viewed as political participants.
That's an interesting thought, actually. I don't. Now, obviously, I've got a lot of like controversial opinions on like philosophers using fictional stories to like as almost like fortune telling devices. Like this is the crystal ball, and we.
Oh yeah,
like tarot, like tarot cards.
Moon is a Harsh Mistress has some great ideas in it, but some of the speculation and like personal taste. Time Enough for Love is another example of this, where like some of Heinlein's very idiosyncratic stuff comes in, particularly around sexuality. It's just like, okay, this is a little cringe now.
Well, I'm going to take Heinlein's citizenship citizenship of citizen versus civilian, and I'm going to move it into our sphere, which makes more sense. I mean, obviously, we don't have any power, right? We're not influencers. We're either late to the game or just not talented enough or not bombastic enough, not willing to sell enough. However, I'll get back to that in a second. We probably have an opportunity to actually get a message out there. What we should probably think about right now is who was ride or die from the beginning and for the right reasons. Those are citizens. Anybody who comes over and found the light of Jesus after Constantine was converted, that's great. You could be in the back pews, but the 12 are the 12, and that's always just be the 12. The first apostles are the first apostles. Their first converts. Like, unless your head was on a... and I actually run into this as a Christian myself. Like, I mentioned that I had been in physical danger for being a Christian. Most Christians on this planet have never faced any penalty, social, monetary, or... strange enough, COVID was probably the only exception. Like, the biggest exception was recently, and that was just losing your job. Which I say just losing your job. That can be devastating to a family. But it's not like you're all been put on a cross to die. So I'll put it in some perspective. It's like, the man in the front of the church who's on the cross dying is not just there for decoration. Like that's your fate. That's the one you've accepted. And it gets frustrating when I have these Christians who then come in and start morally policing. Like I don't think it's any of our jobs to morally police. And that's actually the losing strategy. That's actually when things are super, super easy. And that's how you lose influence, is when you start turning into a moral police. Instead, like you get these moral beacons. But the thing is, the people who are the first to convert had to go through the trials and tribulations and the risks and earn their place. Like in let's say that's the MAGA movement. I don't know if it'd be the MAGA movement forever, but it's really just America over and over again. Like MAGA is just another facet of America. Abolitionists,
they're just the current person holding the torch in the in the shared civilizational endeavor. Yeah. And I mean, as loath as I am to say it, the woke were for like the last 7-8 years or so. And they didn't do a good job with it, but the fact of the matter is they were.
And the problem was they were overplaying their hand constantly, to the point where it was conspicuous artistic indulgence, to commanding. Making work. So I guess what I'm saying is that the right's worst enemy right now are tradcaths, probably, because they are fully safe and they're going to take it way too damn far, and it's going to just turn off the normies. The normies just want to be left alone and want some like reasonable, like if stuff makes them feel gross, they'll want it gone. I think I saw a poll earlier that like only 56% of people in America now support gay marriage and 36% are opposed to it. And I was like, don't push that. What you should do is maybe just turn into civil union or something. In other words, you give your enemy a little bit of ground, and that keeps you from overindulging, because you don't gain anything from it other than enemies. Right. In other words, you're not using calculus to do things anymore. You're just indulging your own sense of moral superiority.
Yeah, not a tradcath, but I agree with you in broad trajectory. I think, another instinct or tendency is also sort of the Orrin McIntyre, like, what does victory look like? And it's like, well, our enemies are driven out of civil society and we establish our own patronage networks. And it's like, okay, well, patronage networks don't exactly select for consistent excellence. They select for a whole host of other social and parasocial variables, not for actual material accomplishment. And you're also driving your enemy into the wilderness, the place where you get strength. You're essentially proposing a victory state that looks like, yeah, let's overplay our hand in 10 years. That'll be awesome and never backfire. And like,
Yeah. I actually wanted to make fun of Arn McIntyre by like getting a picture of Tobias Funke from Arrested Development. I mean, like, I'm going to tell my kids this is what who Arn McIntyre is. You've got to be stupid to do that. That's why I think that casting America as a place of conflict, not perfection. So, finally, an hour and 15 minutes in, we're going to talk about European versus American conservatism, because there's a couple of pillars of American conservatism, I think, that are actually in complete opposition to European conservatism. And by say complete opposition is that we cannot coexist. Europe and America cannot coexist in strength, right? One of us would have to be horrendously weak for us to coexist. And you see that. You see that America gets undermined and is driven extremely weak. And you're probably seeing now the era of Europe being undermined and driven extremely weak. Europe is being driven weak because they're following American principles of, well, I mean, they're taking it way too far, the immigration thing. America's always kind of been about immigration. If you just stuck with the original English inhabitants, you would not have the America you have today. And I think people are mostly thankful for that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go on a quick bio break, but I'm going to take you with me while I'm on the road, just so I can follow this, because I'm really curious to hear where this goes.
By all means. All right. Okay, good. He's muted. All right, excellent. All right, wish Alex Kosma all the best. Cosmonaut. Let's go. So, what America values is conflict. We actually love conflict. It's a bit of a fetish. We have a fighting amongst ourselves conflict. We are the masculine aspect of the two brothers fighting, the Romulus and Remus, right? That is what America is. If you look at what the perennial American movies are, and I suppose I should do a video on this sometime once I actually start making videos again, of what movies really captivate America. I think America is the only country in the world that has court dramas. Not only court dramas in movies, but court dramas as television, stories, plays. We spend most of our time. It seems like America spends a lot of its mental time in the court. Why is that? Because the court is the place where you can civilly fight for what you think is right. It is literally a parable of rhetorical combat to change the world, to change the place you live in, to change the laws. And it is the civil participation in the formation of those laws, the interpretation of those laws, which, by the way, would not ever happen in Europe, a continent ruled by monarchs who were elected by God, appointed by God to give the peasantry the word of the law from himself, right? Europe does not have that. America fights to decide what is right. We don't believe there is strangely enough, we actually don't believe there is an objective right. And it seems very strange to say because America is also purportedly a Christian nation. However, which Christian? I'll bring up the picture again. Let's see if I can pull it over. All right. There you go. Yeah, what kind of a Christian are you? Right? Just replace the word nerd with Christian. Okay? So what kind of a Christian are you? That's up for interpretation. That's up for debate. Right? Well, what's the right thing to do? And that's the reason why America left Europe, is because there was a hegemony of the Catholic Church that would tell you from command what is right. Whereas every American believes that they have the capacity to be a speaker of truth, if not just an arbiter of a little bit of truth. And they have to speak that truth to everyone else and see if that actually lands. And that actually affects every facet of our society, left and right. It actually affects every facet of the American people. I mean, what was Black Lives Matter and DEI other than an attempt to restore justice? Even that has to be done in the frame of a decided right through combat of ideas. Now, they overstretched their hand. They forgot that it was supposed to be combat. They thought they had won. And they overplayed their hand and began moralizing. As I said, Americans hate that. Americans hate being told what is right. We would rather believe in flat earth and be wrong than be told of a round earth and be right. We'd rather figure it out ourselves. We'd rather go through the combat of it. So I think that thinking that America is going to have a victory condition that is static and set in place, like Arne McIntyre fantasizes of, is not going to happen because America wants fighting. America wants to fight. You show me a conservative dad who's figured it out, and I'll show you the rebellious son and daughter that tear it all apart. It's going to happen on a cycle every time because we don't accept that. I think there's a spiritual aspect of Americans just not wanting to accept someone else's truth, which is why we're the best and why we're also extremely mediocre in a lot of ways and extremely chaotic because none of the science is ever settled here.
It's interesting. It's in terms of character, it is a strong difference between us and Europeans, because I am of the opinion that America actually is an ethno state, but it's different in some elements of its character and constitution than other countries.
Okay.
In that the assimilative path is actually far quicker in America than it is elsewhere.
Oh yeah,
and more highly prized. But you are essentially an American when you follow our code of conduct ethos, even though it's different. Like there's difference between men of Essex and men of Cornwall. There's difference between Yankees and Californians. But by and large, once you pass the test of being an American in terms of disposition and attitude, you are an American. It's a little bit different from Europe. The Europeans tend to be a little bit more particular and defensive of their settled way of doing things, whereas Americans are not necessarily as settled. I don't know that it's even a good thing that we are this way. It does make us a little bit wild and chaotic.
Extremely.
But it's a cultivation of unique virtues, and I think we talked about last time conservatism is different between different people in different places and different times.
Yes.
What you're conserving can be a wide range of things, including institutions, norms, customs, and practices. Those are wildly variable. It's also very important to conceptualize ideas, theories, customs, etc., as forms of technology. Just as a stick is a prosthetic hand for some purposes, an ATM is also a prosthetic hand. Ideas and ideologies can be a form of prosthetic brain.
Yes.
And all technology is built to solve particular problems under particular circumstances, has constraints, limitations, and particular excellences. The technological toolkit we are working with and the conditions we are working with are very, very different from Europeans. How many Europeans or overly intellectualized Americans who have absorbed European ideals about transportation do you see going for high-speed rail? It's like, look around you, bro. Look around this country. High-speed rail does not work here.
No,
as excellent as the European ideas and institutions are for their circumstances, they're dog shit here. Get rid of that.
And the thing is, there's a certain type of American that I think is going to start getting beaten down, and I hope so. I do like a good beating. I mean, I like a good kung fu movie. I think, and again, the thing that I think is the American identity, which has become emergent and not on purpose, is conflict. Is that Americans worship conflict, and we love a champion. General Patton, I think, actually had his finger on the pulse of what an American is, because I'll read through his works and I was like, yeah, that actually emergently is true. Like when I observe the revealed preferences of Americans, we love a winner and we hate a loser, and we will only tolerate a loser for so long because. And it only way you can make a loser look good is if you make them seem like they would be in a winner otherwise. George Floyd was going to be a Supreme Court justice.
We love a winner, we hate a loser, and we support an underdog. but only as
Yes.
long as the underdog is a winner in waiting.
Correct. Yeah, like I almost said Rambo. I'm sorry. I meant to say oh god. I'm when I'm on stream I like lose my ability to look up. My lookup table goes
Rocky
bad.
Balboa.
Rocky Balboa, that's right.
He
I kept
loses
wanting
in
to
the
think
first movie, which is very
Yeah.
important, and he is still
Yeah.
the hero.
Absolutely. He made it. He won. He didn't have to have another movie for him to be a winner because he would have been a local legend. He probably would have like gotten help to get a good job away from the mob and stuff. He probably would have been happy living out his days and then run a sandwich shop. You know, that's the American dream. He got the girl and he runs a sandwich shop. But anyways, the conflict, and we always feel like the check is in the mail kind of thing of like there's a part of like you're a bum, but also at the same time is like you could be a champion though, and that's it keeps the chaos up. I actually kind of like America being chaotic to an extent, because you got to have enough room for the refined people to achieve their heights. But you also have to have enough chaos so that the people who've achieved the heights can't just stay there and do nothing. So again, families are always rising and falling in the United States. But the
Can I give you one of the gayest but most useful philosophical terms to describe this level of conflict? It is erotic agonistic conflict, or erotic agonistic rivalry.
okay, you're gonna have to explain that one.
So I do high level competitive wargaming. I'm probably one of the best in the world at this game I play, certainly one of the best in the United States. And we have like a competitive circuit. There's an attitude and disposition in seasoned competitors that you recognize after a while, which is, we're playing a game together, a one-on-one game. This is an adversarial conflict. One of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose. Particularly in a tabletop game when there's not a judge on every table and like physically moving pieces can be high impact, the state of the game is maintained in trust. It has to be between the two players playing it. The reason you can support a competitive scene in something like this is when the people who choose to compete recognize their rival as someone who is attempting to bring out the best in themselves by bringing out the best in you. You have a partnership in expressing excellence.
Yes. Okay.
This, it turns out, creates an extremely healthy community because your goal is to win and your goal is to deserve or to earn winning. How do you ensure that your opponent deserves or earns winning? You play the game properly. You make them and yourself play the game properly, and you make one of you win right.
Two things on that is that probably explains the eventual fraternization of the European powers after all those wars. Second, this is extremely anime, which I just want to point out. Yeah.
Yeah, wait, it's because it's it's tapping into a true dynamic in how human beings, specifically concerned with some external measure, some in reality measure, behave with one another once they sort of like purify down their intentions and their behaviors. And there's a divide in the game I play too between the competitive and the casual. Like the casuals are fine and fun, and you need them to sustain a community, but they have a different ethos and behavior than competitors.
Well, it's not everybody who can be so confrontational yet so fraternal.
Right. And it's also like not everyone is going to want this, and it's fine not to want this. You just have to pretend that not pretend that the people who don't want this behave the same as the people who do, because they don't. It is a dynamic that comes out, and something that's very important is commitment to some external standard. Like, you can't really have virtue without some test or measure of whether it is expressed. This has to be a little bit open-ended in a sophisticated society. But where you start to get into trouble is when rather than being externally defined in some way, it starts to become socially defined and defined solely in terms of esteem.
Oh
Then
shit.
you start getting to
Yeah.
play weird games and behavior degenerates. I think this is like the wheel of samsara is really important. You have to realize where you are on the wheel of samsara and why the European conservatives are kind of in their own like fucked up little shit pile.
I
Is
know.
they're on a continent that spent 120 years playing social games while the Americans have been playing real games.
Oh yeah, you're halfway in there. I'm glad I let you finish. I was so excited, but you already knew what I was going to say because you knew it. Like this is the truth. They are the casuals. Holy shit, the Europeans are the casuals. They're over there talking shit about stuff that happened 200 years ago. Americans are like, "What have you done for me today? What have you done for me today? What do you do?" And I'll go in there and I'll start
this week.
Exactly. Like when I bring my American attitude into a European theater, it makes them so mad, and I just say normal shit. And I didn't. That's a really interesting thought because I pissed off this entire server full of ladies. I didn't mean to do it. If any ladies ever watch this, I'm really sorry. I was just saying what my expectations were in a wife, and that was a bad idea.
It was so women the truth about that unless it's in a closed and entirely non-social environment.
It was extremely funny though, so I'll probably do it again. I started saying like I would like my wife to be able to clean my chicken coop. That's actually the reason why I made the Cinderella video, by the way, because I was a response to them because they started bringing up like, well, in our in culture, our stories reveal a part of reality, and I was like, okay, I'll just take one of the stories. And they mentioned Cinderella, so I was like, yeah, complete peasant girl who didn't ask for any prince. Totally got the prince. So in other words, but who was asking for the prince? It was the wicked stepsisters. In other words, Americans take shit really seriously. And I mentioned like how I'm doing with my career. Europeans don't talk about money or their career. And I know that from the English, because the English have told me this on the Lotus Eaters podcast with Miles Rutledge was a guest. It was one of the 3 that he did recently, where they just mentioned casually that Miles mentions casually that people in England don't really like it when he talks about how much money he's making doing the Afghan rug sales thing. Americans would be over the moon for that. Americans would love that. They'd want to in on that. They'd like, how can I do that? Maybe I should go to Turkey or something, or go to some other dangerous place. Set up rug sales in North Korea. Who knows? Possibilities are endless. Americans take stuff really seriously, whereas the Europeans are playing the social games of like, this is how much you're supposed to make. This is how hard you're supposed to work. And Americans hate that because it reminds us of like the union guys. There's a certain despising of union guys in America if you're not in a union. Is that these guys always work slow. They show up at the time. They'll unload as much from the truck that they're supposed to, and then they won't unload anymore. There's too many rules. In other words, rules. Whereas Americans are like, and you see this kind of hatred, vitriol, I'm going to say vitriol, towards federal employees now because they're living on social games. Whereas most Americans are like, private sector is the way to go. You get laid off, sorry about that. Eat, pray, love, and then keep looking for jobs. It is what it is. Whereas the Europeans want lots of guarantees. America is not a place of guarantees. We are really brutal. We are actually very close to what my ancestors dealt with the Dutch East India Trading Company of what have you done for me lately? Like you're one nutmeg quota short of being removed and replaced with somebody else ethnically, completely. And your whole family of like 50 people on your compound is now destitute. So it's always, in other words, the colonies were meant to be played to win. Like India was played to win. That's why you have the Brahmin, the upper class of India, are so serious, and why the Asians are so serious, because they're playing for survival. Mm-hmm. Americans can be somewhat mediocre sometimes, but a lot of Americans, even without any impetus for it, will play to win. And you love those guys because they're just so spontaneous and they're so genuine with it. They didn't need an external factor to become amazing. Like Elon Musk could have just run a Burger King if he wanted to. 9 to 5, show up, occasional Saturday.
It's really down to personality and animating principle and how much you are engaged with a reality oriented problem or motivating factor. And what you say about rules, like there's various levels of comfort. government employment does specifically appeal to people who want long-term stability and not very much demand. And and actually, like, you really kind of don't want that sector to grow very big. But it takes a unique personality type, set of motivations, etc. Silicon Valley, around the time I first moved to California, was also very, very impressive in how risk taking it was. Now, it changed pretty dramatically over my tenure there, and toward the end, like, culturally, I was grateful to get out of what I found myself in.
Okay.
But it really does deal with a difference in motivation. So, like, one of the classic things is wage earners versus entrepreneurs. This is like a basic economic distinction. You
Yeah.
choose to earn a wage. That means you are declining risk for steady income. Now, somebody like Taleb in Black Swan explains, yeah, there are hidden downsides and like risk exposures that you're not necessarily internalizing, but your day over day reward schedule is fairly frequent. That said,
Perception is reality,
in order to achieve that, your bounded downside and upside are like fairly narrow. Entrepreneur, you are choosing a life of risk, of very high uncertainty, but your exposures upward and or downward can be really, really wild.
Yeah.
It also comes with the cost that you'll also need often capital, which is saved work or surplus. It's a basic economic distinction. If you get a culture whose elite mindset is dominated by wages, you are in the wheel of reincarnation, being turned over as a fly over and over and over again. And America, for like the last 100 years, maybe even 200 years, has been reincarnated as a human, reincarnated as a human. Maybe we get reincarnated as a tiger and work our way back up, and
Yeah.
but it's possible to drop all the way to the bottom of that wheel too.
Well, and the funny thing is, if the ultra, I don't even know if it's right wing, but if you had an ultra entrepreneurial America, I think that would be so intolerable to life that it would become unstable, because you do actually need people who are wage earners. Like, you kind of need a very large amount. So I've been going back and forth in my mind about your assertion that America not being a classed society does create some resentment. I think there's some truth to that, but I think it makes more than that. It makes a lot of uncertainty, and it doesn't necessarily fit everyone's personality.
Interestingly, in psychological studies, we actually tend not to be resentful of entrepreneurs. We tend to be resentful of high wage earners. So this is like government employees and anybody that we construe as getting like paid regularly. Interestingly, this also includes most actors. That social resentment goes in that direction. Also, when people misconstrue, like when people have no conception of what an entrepreneur is,
that's
like,
just ignorance.
How does somebody become a billionaire? Well, you have to steal a lot. Like, nah, dog. This is somebody who figured out how to put capital in motion and make money while they sleep.
I actually don't have a lot of hatred for ignorant people. I just have a lot of hatred for those who exploit ignorance. Who know better.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with being ignorant as long as you don't fuck things up for other people.
Exactly. I think actually, it's an interesting thing is, if I was going to like commission a lot of literature, but by the way, literature is right now targeted towards women. I would probably write a lot of stories about charming, hardworking entrepreneurs working their way up, because if I was going to like try and change the culture towards how women see very wealthy men, to try and reduce the left-wing bent of women, I'd probably do that, right? Like, in other words, not like 50 Shades.
You're essentially talking about taking Atlas Shrugged from fringe female erotica to mainstream female erotica. Because let's make no mistake, as insightful as that book is, that is what it is.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's actually an interesting thought. Maybe I should try writing a romance novel. It'd be funny. just the full cynical, like, exploitative, like, romance. Like, I think a lot of ladies want to be exploited in a lot of ways. They want to be made to feel a certain way. Give me the chocolate so I feel happy. Give me the diamond so I feel valuable. Give me the night out so I feel transcendent. Anyways, the American condition is weird because I don't think we'll ever be stable, and I don't think that's what our destiny is. Maybe the rest of the world, our allies, can learn from that. But right now, you get a lot of anti-American sentiment in Europe, and I think that's hurting them because they're doing what the Democrats are doing, which is anything that Trump is doing is evil and bad, and we'll do the opposite. Even if it's like Trump says, "Don't put salt in your eye," they're going to go and put a bunch of salt in their own eyes. You know, if they say, "Don't take this medication because it helps for certain viruses of unknown origin," they'll just outlaw it, just out of spite. Just,
Right? Yeah. If you're in the game of reactance like that, you know,
yeah.
it's essentially like, this is one thing, like a problem I became very aware of thanks to Sitch and Adam. I'm not like, I don't go to them for most things, but I am grateful for them, like really drawing the distinction between free will as a metaphysical phenomenon versus free will as a psychological phenomenon. The metaphysical free will has the metaphysical free will debate has no dividends. It pays out nothing, no matter who is correct. It does not matter. Free will as a psychological phenomenon is super, super important. If you are in the domain of reactance, like, oh, you said the wrong, you know, you said my enemy said something, therefore I am going to do the opposite. You are actually you have no control over the direction of your life or what you do.
Yeah.
And you know, it is very, very easy to fall into that place. It's also like, you know, you mentioned earlier, like, oh, what a win it would be if we set Dave Rubin on fire. It's like, nah, dog, even reacting to your own base like that is going to result in losses. And, you know, when you start responding to, you know, when you start responding to social signals like that versus, you know, underlying reality oriented signals, you're no longer in control of your own thoughts or actions, and you are going to go bad places because you're very easily misled. You're very easily pushed in the wrong direction. This is like the Doge thing and liberals being compelled to defend money laundering. Like somebody discovered they lack free will in this area and is just dragging them through broken glass and watching them eat it.
This is the kind of manipulation, by the way, that has a lot of utility in daily life as well as political life. If you find someone who's acting like that, you just got to play, what's his name, Jim from The Office. You got to just play the Jim. You just have to prank them. You have to dunk on them very hard. Because if someone's reacting to you, they can either actually resist you or they can resist this weird caricature of you that you put out. And to realize that most of politics is just caricatures. Trump in his like personal life, I don't know what he's like, and it's important to understand that no one knows what Trump is actually like in person, as himself, other than himself and maybe his wife, maybe. Skilled people put on caricatures, and it's important to know if you are being played to or played for, right? And yeah, me and my wife had this observation. So my wife is Australian, but ethnically she's fully English. She kind of knows that sphere a little bit. And I pointed out that almost every British comedy has a Pratt. They always have to have a Pratt. And it's always one designated Pratt. Like if you go onto a Faulty Tower, it's the Spanish guy. If you watch Black Adder, it's Baldric, right? Cunning Plan. Yeah, or whoever, was it Hugh Laurie plays? He's on sometimes the Pratt. They'll have a designated Pratt. Whereas, like, you take American comedy, as bad as it is, or as good as it is, Friends, they all take turns being Pratts. Everyone gets a turn at being a Pratt. And that actually tells you a lot about the culture of America versus Europe, is that Europe kind of forms an opinion of somebody and they force them to play that role. Whereas in America, you can be the clown and also be the hero at the same time. And it's just a strange, you could have I bet you could have a 6-hour video, like total video series on the revealed preferences and cultural differences between Europe and America in terms of how we treat heroes, how we treat comedy, tragedy, and all this stuff, because we have a very incompatible way of doing things in terms of how our narratives are created. And that's our narrative disjunction is actually making Europe play into America's hands, because America can just do whatever it can be whoever it has to be to get what it wants. Because as the bard says, this above all to thine own self be true. The only people that really know Americans are Americans. The only person who knows Trump is Trump. He's kind of been playing everyone like a fiddle. And it's been a hell of a thing to see because he played the Pratt for a while, and he still does. I think the American conservatism seems to be founded in this conflict, which means that to us, Trump looks fully consistent. Whereas I think to Europe, everyone doesn't know what he's going to do next. I think Trump's base kind of figures nothing that Trump has done has been a huge surprise to his base.
No,
even if
no.
it wasn't announced.
If you listen to what he says, like, yeah, exactly. It's all announced. Like, there's no shocks coming. It's straightforward.
And if he doesn't announce it, it's pretty consistent with what he's been doing before. Whereas his opponents are treating like the Department of Education like it's the second tower. You know, an airplane going to the second tower is like, oh, we knew that was coming. We always knew there was going to be another airplane, didn't that?
Yeah.
Of course it was.
Returning to the why Europe is like this, I think just as a quick note, like it is important that Americans, when relating to like conservatives across the sea, remember that these are cousins, not brothers.
Yes. Yeah.
But the whole American foreign policy blob and like everyone who can is destabilizing. Destabilization is really important, and I don't think there's anywhere that's been as culturally destabilized as Europe. Because it prevents cohesion, because it prevents advocacy for one's own interests and ability to cohere around it. Destabilization also means if you are living in a destabilized environment, unremarkable people tend to dominate it. People who tend to be oriented around social games and not necessarily oriented around reality-based goals. Europe's
that makes sense because chaotic areas, by their nature, remain chaotic, whereas people who have merit actually can make the chaos into order over time. Like you see the fractured space industry, and I still don't know how Elon Musk does it, other than just him doing his thing every day, his engineering principles every day, has basically made up for all of the chaos in the American space industry caused by NASA's dysfunction. It's fucking bananas. But I know in my heart of hearts, he would never, ever be able to do any of this stuff if he was in Europe. So Europe has a self-sustaining chaos.
So here's the thing. I think part of Europe looks like it has a self-sustaining chaos, just like the left looked like it had a kind of self-sustaining momentum until the money got cut off, and we realized most of it was even domestically the work of the foreign policy blob, developing things that weaken resistance to the blob getting what it wants out of the people who ostensibly oversee it. Like, I guarantee you, if this American purge keeps going, Europe has its own revenue streams, but they're also kind of economically dying because they've been subverted for a long time.
Right.
I bet you, as the money dries up, we will realize how much of Europe's elite was just fake and the result of being destroyed on purpose by America and others.
Well, I have no doubt of that. Now, here's what I do have a doubt of, though, is what I was talking about, the different comedies. Like, this is actually quite fundamental to the mindset, is that what you cannot do if you are trying to build yourself up is adopt a victimhood mindset. And if Europe, like especially like the other streamers like Academic Agent and the guys, the Lotus Eaters, some of them.
Oh, there's a great point in Andrew Tate on this. I'll bring it up later.
Yeah, no worries. If they start to see that America is the cause of their problems, they will never get better. They will be the international N-word forever, because that's exactly how you stagnate and make the wrong decisions, because you're always fighting a foreign enemy. You always have the baldric. Like the problem with the baldric problem, I'm going to call it that, is that sometimes the fool is actually the smartest one, and is often the smartest one. So once they start typifying America as being this thing that's their enemy, or that this enemy had no merit, they just got lucky or took advantage of them in a bad time. Once they stop being able to see the merit of an adversary or the merit of a bad ally, whichever one you want to consider America to be, they will become they will adopt this victimhood mindset, which will actually get in the way of them succeeding. I guess I just don't see them pulling out of this if they adopt that mindset. And I think that they're doing that. Like even the blaming the tiny hat people is like, okay, you got some compromise on your politicians and they gave you some bad loans. What are you going to do? England is still mad that America loaned them money in World War I and World War II. I was like, that was a bajillion years ago. Do you not want that loan? It doesn't matter. Like it is what it is. You have headwinds now. You can either be really pissed at America and become like create the English equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't know, call the Sons of Saxony or something like that, and be really mad at America, or you could just get over it and just accept your crappy lot and just move on. That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that they're not going to be able to understand America in a different context, the Baldric situation. And I'm afraid they're going to adopt this victimhood mindset, which will make them play the fools. Because even if Trump doesn't want to dominate Europe, American corporations are going to adopt the Dutch East India Trading Set mindset and just start dominating nations. Like American companies are like nations unto themselves in terms of power. So who knows if they get let off the chain.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the trajectory of the eternal cycle is underlying material conditions are changing, and the way institutional power works, the way that privately mobilized capital power works is changing over time. That's a baseline reality, and this is something I can go into like maybe on another stream because it's its own discussion. I'm a little bearish on the UK right now. Like they have to find it within themselves to do some deeply unpleasant things and risk not look, because the jester is a stable position because the jester is essentially self-effacing. They are the butt of every joke.
Right.
In order, I think, for England to get out of its situation, it needs to be deadly serious for a while, and it cannot the jester is something you do to avoid being hated for telling hard truths. I think England and the UK to some extent needs to be able to accept being hated for a while to get themselves out of the mess that they're in. The country I'm very bullish on actually is France. As much as they have in their like Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, history of Rousseau and all this shit, like as much intellectual deadweight as France has and cultural deadweight as France has, my experience of French people, and this was very interesting, by the way, going to CES for professional reasons and talking to French vendors, they very much have an interest in and insistence on excellence. Even if they're not living in a society with the backbone or intellectual or social climate to support it, the French people are very proud of themselves in a way that is necessary for them to be
seriously.
great.
Yeah, that's true. The English have this sort of just a bit of banter. That's how we. Which I always as an American, I interpret.
I mean, you look at their language. How many of their idiomatic expressions are on the face of it silly, and how many do you have to see before you say, "Okay, this is not a serious people"?
That's true. Like instead of saying someone died, they kicked the bucket, kind of thing. It's going to be interesting because what I think is actually more important than ideas, because anybody can make an idea and any idea can get popular. It's temperament that shows how far it goes, and your past doesn't really necessarily reveal your future. It just reveals your character. And to figure out how your past reveals your character, you have to look at the motivations behind it, right? So let's say that the French Revolution occurred and it was just out of a sense of justice. It's like, okay, they have a strong sense of justice. The murdering and borderline genocide was all aside, right? Made a mistake. They got a little overzealous. But their motivation was justice. Maybe they can actually turn the corner. However, and you look at America, when we've done stuff like that, it's out of expansion and power. We don't do stuff that we do stuff out of justice sometimes, but we really like power a lot more than that. Or else we'd probably give the Native Americans a lot more land than they have and a lot better land, right? Because revealed preference, we don't really care.
I'm aware of two major definitions of power, and I'm curious which one you mean. Power essentially being like, and these definitions aren't even necessarily exclusive of one
Oh, sure,
another.
sure.
But power in the sense of hegemony or dominance versus power being the material wherewithal to effectuate your will. Because when I hear Americans love power, I think much more number two, but it's also been a lot of number one, especially in the second half of the 20th century. So I'm curious if it's both or just one that you're intending there.
Though both of those definitions actually infer an intention. And I'm not sure if Americans have a lot of intention, so I'm inclined to say the second one, because the second one is very immediate. There's oil in them hills, I want that oil. There's gold there, I want the gold. And then once you have the gold, you're
it's
like...
almost as though hegemony is an after effect.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Doing what you need to do.
And you'll see this actually through all the different American robber barons, is they all just go straight for naked power of money. And effectualization, right? The ability to affect their industry. And then once they realize the government is actually part of the affecting of that industry, let's take Vanderbilt and the railroads, he'll then start influencing the government, which is actually the exact trajectory that Musk is on, where he had his own domain, where he was affecting change and getting material, going on some mission. And then he realized there's outside forces affecting his mission. So he creeped his way out to affect that. And he's just going to keep creeping out until eventually he controls as much as he's allowed to control. He realizes those strings are now the way he wants them to be, and then he'll refocus, which is sort of I haven't read the biography of Henry Ford, but I feel like that's what he did later in his life. He just refocused back on what he was doing. The Henry Ford Foundation is separate from Henry Ford, but I digress. The Americans don't really intend... Americans are funny because we tend to be peasants to some extent, or at least educated peasants, and then just through sheer spite, opportunity, I guess very few of us are visionaries of like what we're going to go eventually. I feel like Vanderbilt didn't think he was going to be Vanderbilt. What he wanted to do is he started out as just a ferryman in New York, and then it kind of just spiraled out of control until eventually he sold all of his ferry stuff and went all in on railroads and then become super, super rich. So Americans don't really have a plan, I think. I don't think Musk ever thought he was ever... He's explicitly said he never thought he would be in government.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, he's also like been fairly clear. Like the plan is go to Mars, but I guarantee you, very few young men who dream of going to Mars think, fuck, in order to go to Mars, like my government is going to become like kind of fucked up and on the trajectory of stifling real material progress. That I'm just going to need to like get in there and tell these guys to fuck off. Because I've achieved so much success that in order to succeed on the next level, I need to tell the political system to fuck off.
Exactly. And I think that American power is actually strangely ad hoc. We'll get onto a thing and then we'll just drop it. Mm-hmm. It's really weird. Let's imagine America went and became anti-Muslim, like for Europe, like anti-Muslim immigrant in Europe. We'd probably do that for a few years. Then we just sort of peter out. We did the same thing with, I'm trying to remember which, it just left my brain. But anyways, America will pursue some goal in the short term and then just forget about it after a while. I mean, the most immediate one that comes to mind is actually killing Mormons. We just sort of forgot about doing that. It's like, hey, they're out of our face. We're not going to like pursue them to like. There's one bunch of guys that pursued them to Salt Lake City, but they all got massacred, and it's like, whatever. No one really cared.
I wonder if that's a function of Americans over time having a decreasing number of aristocratic dynasties. I don't know that that's the case that we do, but my instinct is just based on cultural trajectories that, in the early 19th or maybe mid 19th century, we probably had more aristocratic dynasties just by sheer number than we do now.
Yeah, I mean, like, you look at the Kennedys, and the Kennedys are just like an advisor now, like a sub-advisor to Trump, who was only 2 generations into greatness. His father was like a landlord in New York City. It's hard to have any sort of like, even in a mimetic sense, it's hard to have any sort of dynasties in America when you have up-and-comers and nobodies becoming the most powerful and wealthiest man in the world, just by his own sheer actions. So, yeah, this is another thing that America and Europe actually are self-defeating each other on, is that we kind of make the royal family look like a bunch of losers because just some random dude in a t-shirt is just doing way more and kicking way more ass. And like we have Home Depot is worth as much as all of the startups in Europe for the last 50 years or some crazy shit I saw. It's like, yeah, just the place that sells lumber and power tools is like more powerful than nations. It's America is a weird place in that it completely it de-authenticates everything that Europe found prideful about itself. That's why I say that we actually can't. I don't think we could really coexist that well because they'd either always be in our shadow or they would always be causing trouble with us. Because if the Aaron McIntyres, who I believe that Aaron McIntyre is more of a Europe, Aaron McIntyre, Tucker Carlson, these guys who are really focused on individual, especially old world ethnicities, are kind of an enemy to the United States because that's actually depowers the United States. And the United States, above all, wants power over purity. And it turns out that when black people and white people and Irish people and Italian people and English people and German people actually all work together, it's really powerful. So if you start like drawing identity lines on that, like let's say we take this very successful anti-BLM sort of mindset the conservatives have going. If you start making it a pro-white mindset, well, then you start asking like, what kind of white people are you? And then you alienate also the most influential people in the conservative Trump movement, the MAGA movement. I'm gonna distinct MAGA versus conservative. Half the MAGA people that are up there are like, I mean, you got Kash Patel, you got Vivek Ramaswamy, you've got Elon Musk, who's also an immigrant from South Africa. You could say that he's Anglo, but he considers himself a full American, and he is fully in favor of foreigners and wanting more of them. So how do you square that with the Tucker Carlsons who want a white ethno state? It's like that's not going to happen. They're gonna have to come to blows at some point. So if the European ethno conservative thing tries to, I'll be quick. If the European ethno conservative mindset keeps filtering into America, it's just going to create more and more discord where maybe there wasn't any, because I'm in agreement with you that there actually is an American ethnicity, and that's just American, and you could be whatever heritage you want, but if you buy into these values, and I would add make certain sacrifices, right?
Yeah.
A trust fund kid, a trust fund kid who's an all-American is not quite the same as blue collar coal miner kid who like rose up. That's why JD Vance is so rhetorically powerful. I'm sorry, I went on for a little bit.
No. I think it's really good stuff. Gosh, I mean, many of the points you brought up, I feel like could be a whole conversation in their own right. You know, there's a certain strain in the American right, like MAGA versus conservatives, and you know, I think you're right to draw the distinction that the American like broad right sphere also contains Euro conservatives in it.
Yes.
And you know, it's particularly easy to see in sort of literary influence, like Italian elite theory, and like, oh yes, your political line is drawn on 19th century Italian and Austrian political thinking. Like, no surprise that your vision is you know, particularly narrowed on a European way of thinking. You know, I think this is sort of a last point for me, because I'm sort of running up against time. But
no, you're good. You're good.
An important thing to remember is when there are coincidences historically, when things start happening around the same time. I mean, like, this is a gimme example, but the ending of the medieval mini ice age and the start of the Industrial Revolution happened to start around the same time. So inferring climate change causality on the basis of one or the other is a little tricky, and you need to do a lot of disentangling before you get there. America is also a very young country. You know, there have, in terms of cultural influence, there have been Europeans living here for only 400-ish years sustainably. Settlement of America and the development of a distinct American ethnos, particularly in the 17th and 19th century, is also, you know, coincidental with the start of a change in the material state of technology. where capital begins to overpower most forms of social organization.
Oh wow, yeah,
I
we're born in the industrial age. That's true.
yeah, technological sophistication and the share of material wherewithal and power, as in ability to effectuate one's will, the share that goes to technology and capital formation around the time of the creation of the American ethnicity was really starting to go together. And we are moving into an age where capital is more important than traditional politics in terms of the material shape of reality. That's something that's really important. And like a friend of mine, Joe Quirk, who runs a seasteading institute, big libertarian, one of the things he's fond of saying, like, I used to be a big libertarian. I'm not so much anymore. I'm definitely conservative now. But one of the things he's very insistent on is we are, living in the 21st century, running on 13th century governmental systems. Like that's actually
That's
kind of
right. Yeah.
crazy. And your social organization needs to adapt to how wildly different material circumstances are now.
That's funny that you say that because like emergent governments like the Dutch East India Trading Company and like the United States government, because the United States government, just as a bit of closing remark for me, is that I think the old world has a lot of trouble conceiving of what the United States government is about because they see their governments as being a heritage, a history, an identification. We kind of see our they think our Constitution is a holy document to us. We actually don't really give that much of a shit. It's just sort of like, it's just how do we keep the government out of my business, more or less.
Right.
And
we all
don't
agree
really,
that this is a beneficial arrangement of affairs.
and we're ready to burn that thing down as soon as it stops. The only thing people are really passionate about is the Second Amendment. And and we might edit it someday. We might just have it like, as the meme goes, like, word this so that a 5-year-old can understand it, so we stop having the debates about it. But the flavor of what our governments will be in the future, I mean, will Europe, I wonder, find out next time, will Europe have to adopt these quasi new government structures such as like Dutch East India Trading Company, which is fully extractive wealth state, what do they call it? Economic zone. Yeah, because I was listening to Lotus Eaters guys like, oh, this is not an economic zone, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, actually, I do kind of consider nations to be economic zones. I just sort of show up there, whoever's there is there. I try to work with them. We try to make some money and go home. But I can't conceive of the worldview that they have, and I don't know if it's going to work that much anymore. I mean, the Native Americans also thought they had a nation here. See how much the Americans cared about that. They didn't at all. We sort of say sorry and then we just move on like nothing happened. So I don't know. That might be an interesting thing to talk about, but I'll leave you the closing thoughts. Yeah.
I think there's some consideration in localism and particularism. I mean, I think you're right about broad trajectory. The thing you have to remember about a lot of the Europores is America is so vast relative to them that if you are talking about like the English wanting to be particular in a particular way, it's less close to Americans being that way and more close to Appalachians being that way. And it's entirely consistent to have this sophisticated capital formation dominated world, and the Appalachians also have their norms.
That's a really good point. Yeah. You're in America. You're ethnic. All right. So this is actually something I've said before, and I feel like it's true, and you're saying it too, which is, you and me are agreeing on this. I think is that in America, your ethnic cohesion is kind of your own responsibility. It's like that's your problem. It's not our government's job to try and keep. I mean, we'll try to keep people from coming to the border, but like we don't. It's not the government's job to keep people from California just flooding into Appalachia. Like you Appalachians just have to hold on and just don't get any loans for a little while.
It's the third largest. It's the third largest country by land area, and like what, the third or fourth largest by population. It would be insane if it was the government's job to do that.
That's true. That's true. And I feel like that's what the ethno-state, like European style people want to do. They want to do public works of like, let's make a big marble building with Corinthian statue or Corinthian columns. And I say like, okay, are you going to pay for it? Because I don't want my tax dollars paying for that. Screw that. Just build it on your own house, like proper Greek landowner. Anyways, this has been awesome. Stay on for a little bit after this, but anyone who's watching, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Hope you get some great ideas out of it. Feel free to comment them, join the discussion. We do this show every other week unless something happens. Alex is here despite the fact that his cat has suffered egregious injury. Hopefully that cat recovers nicely.
He's out of surgery. I'm going to go pick him up after this.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Yeah, that's where you go. All right. Excellent. Hey, thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you next time, 2 Thursdays from now, and peace.